So today we're going to begin our series of modules on personality, and we'll be focusing on psychodynamic and psychoanalytic theories, but we'll start with a general introduction to personality. So I can define personality as an individual's characteristic patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that persist over time and across situations, and they're like the seven dwarfs. Everybody has a different combination of personality traits that you probably have had for many, many years since you were younger. And as you get older, it becomes more and more difficult to change those personality traits. In some cases, people end up being diagnosed with personality disorders, which are very inflexible ways of perceiving the world. And these personality disorders lead to psychopathology later in life. So psychodynamic and psychoanalytic theories provided us a glimpse into forces that shape who we are today. These theories focus on unconscious forces that interact to determine our personality. So there is a constant interplay between three primary forces that we're going to talk about: the id, the ego, and the superego in terms of traditional psychoanalysis. And what happens if these forces don't interact properly? We may develop a conflict at some point in our life, and then that can lead to problems later in adulthood. The conflicts generally occur early in life. So early childhood conflict leads to psychopathology or mental illness or problematic behavior in adulthood. And the father of traditional psychoanalysis was Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud started his career as a Viennese physician. So he's living in Austria. He was a physician, and he was interested in how mental and physical symptoms could be caused by purely psychological factors. And the physical symptoms being caused by psychological factors is known as somatization. And Freud was one of the first people, probably was the first person, to actually think of somatization. That mental symptoms or negative thought patterns, problematic thought patterns, can lead to physical symptoms in a person. And the reason why he thought of this was he was a doctor. He was seeing people coming with many physical symptoms, and he believed that some of these physical symptoms were psychologically based or mentally based. He became aware that many powerful mental processes operate in our unconscious without our awareness. You were completely unaware of your unconscious. So I've asked you what's on your unconscious right now. There's no way you can figure that out, right? At least no direct way. Freud came up with ways to try to tap into the unconscious, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. And this insight grew into a theory of the structure of human personality and its development. So Freud's theory was based off of his many patients that he saw as a doctor, and he also based a lot of it off of Sigmund Freud. So you have to take that in consideration as well, that the theory was based off his patients, and his patients were sick. And so does the theory really apply to the entire population, or does it really only apply to sick people? I mean, physically sick people. And based on this unconscious conflict that can lead to problems, he developed a treatment plan called psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis is still somewhat popular today. Not as popular as it was back in Freud's time, which is the early 20th century. But psychoanalysis is, still evident in the major cities like New York City, where you have a psychoanalytic institute. And it's fairly interesting. I've been there. It's you have a lot of interesting people walking around there. And basically, psychoanalysis wants to tap into your unconscious conflicts, but they want to go back to your childhood a lot of times to look at the problems you experienced in your childhood and how that can lead to problems in adulthood. So if you can imagine, going back to your childhood is a pretty long experience, and you're actually working through those conflicts that you were not aware of because they're unconscious. You're trying to bring those unconscious conflicts into consciousness and then work through those conflicts early in life. And if you work through those conflicts early in life, according to psychoanalysis, you become healthier later in life. Now, this is a very timely process. It takes about 3 days a week. of therapeutic sessions, and the sessions are not covered by insurance for traditional psychoanalysis. It's not covered by insurance because it's not an empirically validated therapy, which means there's no research on it to show that it works. Now, that's not to say it doesn't work. I mean, many people have gotten better from psychoanalysis, but 3 days a week, and it takes many, many years of your life. It's a very expensive therapy. So affluent people tend to engage more in traditional psychoanalysis. It's not for everyone because not everyone can afford it. In terms of techniques in psychoanalysis, it's all about bringing up or making the unconscious conscious. So Freud believed in using a technique called free association. He encouraged the patient to speak whatever comes to mind, and then the therapist verbally traces a flow of thoughts into the past and into the unconscious. So basically, that you get a cue. So think about friends. Let's say your cue is friends. And now you just say whatever comes into your mind that revolves around that, that's the starting point. You just start spitting out. So anything that pops into your mind, you say out loud. That's free association. Do not filter. Most of us filter. We think before we talk. Some of us don't, and that's a problem, but most of us filter. Free association is about not filtering. Just say it. Don't think. And eventually, if you don't filter, some of your unconscious will leak out into the conscious and come out of your mouth. And that was the whole goal of, finding or making the unconscious conscious. Some of it will leak through in free association. Now, Freud didn't think about using hypnosis because he didn't believe it worked. He was against hypnosis. He may have tried it at some point. I just don't think he had the ability to get much out of hypnosis. So he didn't use hypnosis to bring out the unconscious, like some people may suggest. He used free association, and he also used slips of the tongue, what we now call Freudian slips. So when you say something and you go, whoops, what did I just say? I didn't mean that. Freud thought you meant that. That was really your unconscious that's coming out. For example, the king and the queen. The king says, "Good morning, beloved." Obviously, beheaded is a slip of the tongue. But Freud would say that that slip of the tongue is really how that person feels. And that it's kind of the unconscious feeling is coming to the surface. And so the slip of the tongue is a trace back to the unconscious, and Freud thought it was important. He also believed in latent dream analysis. What that means is the hidden content of your dream. So psychoanalysis is very big on dream analysis. What do your dreams mean? What's the hidden meaning of the dream? And the unconscious forces that psychoanalysis is interested in, for the most part, is sexual and aggressive drives. So Freud thought that sexual and aggressive unconscious drives or forces needed to be satisfied. And these sexual and aggressive unconscious drives that need to be satisfied, he later labeled as the id. If you didn't satisfy that id, you would end up with problems. And one way to see that is look at your dream and analyze your dream for sexual and aggressive drives. And see what they are and see if you can bring them to consciousness. And now go back to your childhood. What happened in your childhood? Did you kind of repress some of your sexual and aggressive drives, or did you express them properly? And if you didn't express them properly, then you might have problems then, and those problems are coming to roost. They're coming out now, as an adult. So Freud thought of personality like an iceberg. The three forces we have are the id, the ego, and the superego. And the id is pretty much always unconscious, and it consists of sexual and aggressive drives. You're just not aware of them. So those are biological-based drives. The superego is the morality. It's the societal rules and constraints. And most of them are conscious, but some of them are still unconscious. The superego is fighting against the id. Think of the superego fighting against the id. So the id says, you know, I want this now. I'm not going to wait. And the superego says, well, you can't have that because that's against the rules of society. And that's not right. That's not morally right. That's punishable. You can't do that. And the ego is the referee between the superego and the id. The ego is trying to balance out the superego and the id because you don't want to have all id and you don't want to have all superego, right? If you have all id, forget it. A person's going to act on sexual and aggressive drives all the time. They're going to do horrible things, right? You're on the subway, you find someone attractive. If you were all id, right, what you do? You go up to them and you try to have sex with them, like on the subway. If you were walking down the Fifth Avenue and saw something in a very expensive jewelry store and you were all id and you want that, what you do, you break it in the store and you take it. So you can see how all id would lead you to go to jail, right? You'd be a criminal. So the superego has to counter the id and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, you can't do this because this is not right. And so it pushes back against the id. So all id is bad, but all superego is also bad because if you're all superego, then you never express your sexual and aggressive drives. You could never get mad at anybody. You could never, you know, allow your libido, you know, take action on your libido. Basically, go up to someone and, you know, have sexual feelings for someone or show your sexual feelings for someone. You wouldn't be able to do that because you'd be all about, you know, this is not appropriate. I'm going to temper back my id. I'm not going to let my id go anywhere. You know, and, you know, the id fuels the libido. So if you were all superego and no id, you'd have no libido. You'd be very, very, very unhappy person and have a lot of problems. I mean, the person that doesn't express anger or sexuality is going to have, you know, multiple issues later in life. So you kind of have to have a balance, and that's the ego there. The ego is the referee, and the ego says, I need to have, you know, the id needs to have some flexibility here. The id needs to be expressed sometimes, and the superego needs to push back against the id sometimes, and it has to keep a healthy balance. Otherwise, you know, all hell breaks loose. Either you're a criminal or you're a very unhappy, sexually repressed, passive individual and pretty depressed and miserable. So you got to have a balance. Freud viewed the unconscious as a reservoir of thoughts, wishes, feelings, memories that are hidden from awareness because they feel unacceptable, like those sexual drives. That desire to go right up to someone and just get what you want from them, you know, or the desire to punch your boss in the face because you hate him or her, and you just want to go up there and slap them or punch them because they're so annoying. That's it. And so that's kind of, you know, that provokes anxiety because, you know, if you did that sort of thing, you'd be in jail or you'd be fired or both. You'd be in pretty big trouble, in pretty bad shape. So that has to be kept in the unconscious to a degree. You can't let that id completely roam free. And so the ego is very important to keep the id and the superego in some kind of balance. You have to give both. You have to let the id express itself sometimes and let the superego push back against the id sometimes. So how does personality develop? Well, we start life as an infant, and infants are all id. They are impulsive. They live by the pleasure principle. So what do babies do? They want something, they want it now. Give it to me now. If you don't give it to me now, I'll cry. I'll throw a temper tantrum. Your life will be miserable. I won't shut up. So that's id. They're all id. I want this. I want to be fed now. I want to have my diaper changed now. When you're a toddler, I want this toy now, or I'm going to throw myself on the ground and scream and embarrass you. They live by the pleasure principle. It's all id. There's no delayed gratification. It's all id. I want it now. During toddlerhood, the child starts to develop the ego. And the ego follows the reality principle. So the id is still there and it is still kind of unchecked. But the ego develops the reality principle, and the reality principle lets the child put the id on hold, right? So, I want this right now. That's the id. The ego says, okay, you want this. Maybe we can wait a bit. Because there's a lot of other things going on. We have to wait for what we want, but we'll get it later. So that's the start of delayed gratification, that the id can't just get it immediately. The id is still pushing for things, but you can delay it. You can delay the gratification because it's not realistic to get what you want right now all the time. And finally, around 4 or 5 years of age, the child develops a superego, which is the basis of morality. It follows the morality principle. And it develops a superego after successfully navigating the Oedipal complex. So you develop these moral principles from your parents and from society, but mostly from your parents because you're around them all the time. Freud believed that we progress through a series of psychosexual stages, and at each stage the id is focused on the needs of a particular erogenous zone, a sensitive area of the body, where the id wants to receive gratification. People can feel shame about these needs, and they can get fixated at one stage. So if you don't successfully resolve the id's desire, or resolve the id impulses at a particular stage of development, you get fixated, you get stuck. And you don't know how to resolve the needs of that, the needs of that zone, right? You never resolved the id early in life, and now you have problems later in life. So unsuccessful resolution of id early in life leads to psychopathology, problematic behavior as an adult. So here are the stages of psychosexual development. The oral stage, which is the first year of life. And during the oral stage, infants explore the world by picking up objects and putting them in their mouth. So everything goes in the mouth. That's how they learn about the world. Now the id is focused on the mouth. So you're satisfying the id impulses by putting things in their mouth. They receive a lot of pleasure with food. So eating is pleasurable, putting objects in their mouth is pleasurable. Infants is all about putting things in their mouth. But if they don't meet the id's needs at this time, they become fixated or stuck at the oral stage. And then fixation as an adult leads to smoking, overeating, excessive talking, nail biting. These are all actions that center around the mouth. And it's because you did not, express, or satisfy the id's needs during the oral stage. And now you have these oral-related behaviors later in life. It could also lead to clinging, dependent, interpersonal relationships. So you can be one of these clingy people that is not good in relationships, similar to the anxious attachment style. Now, the anal stage occurs between 1.5 to 2.5 years of age. Children learn that they can control their bodily functions. Self-control comes into play, and conflict in this stage leads to adult psychopathology, so problematic adult personality traits. So you think of the anal stage as, potty training stage. That's how children learn to control their bodily functions. And if you're not successful potty training, according to Freud, you develop an anal retentive personality. This is excessive perfectionism, order, cleanliness, control. You become really controlling as an adult. So you have an anal retentive personality. You can also develop an anal explosive personality. You're less restrained, you're careless, you're messy. You know, your life is just all over the place. Now, the next stage, the third stage, is the phallic stage between 3 and 5. Children begin to discover the physical differences between the two sexes and become more focused on their own bodies. Girls develop penis envy. They're jealous that males have penises, according to Freud. They also may develop attachment to the opposite sex, and this is the opposite sex parent. So during the phallic stage, children start to desire the opposite sex parent. And Freud really focused only on boys. He did not focus on girls because he saw girls as neurotic and just not important. So most of his research and his theory is focused on boys and men, and very little has to do with girls or women. So it's a fairly misogynistic theory. But once again, it's also related to the time in which he developed this theory, the early 20th century, where women's rights were still very minimal. Women didn't even have the right to vote at that time. And during the phallic stage, boys go through an Oedipus complex where they sexually desire their mother, but they see their father as a rival. And they become afraid of their father. They think their father will punish them. And not just punish them by, spanking them, but punish them by castrating them, cutting off their genitalia. So they have castration anxiety, that the father will punish them by castrating them, and so they're deathly afraid of that. That's horrible. And as a result, they stop pursuing their mother, and they start identifying their father. They start seeing their father as a role model. The Electra complex is the reverse, although Freud paid this very little attention. He did not emphasize this at all. He pretty much only focused on the Oedipal complex. Electra complex is girls long after the father and they see their mother as a rival. The complex emotions of this stage can lead to several psychological disorders later in life, including depression, guilt, anxiety. These are all a result of problems during the Oedipal Electra complex. Now, during the latency stage, age 5 or 6 to puberty, there's a complete lack of sexual and aggressive urges. So there's no conflict with parents, there's no sexuality at all. Everything is hidden. Everything goes away temporarily. There's no conflict at this stage. It's a timeout period. And the last stage is the genital stage, from about puberty to adulthood. They do not encounter any new psychological conflicts, but they become more aware of their own gender identity. And at this stage, adolescents pursue age-appropriate peers rather than their parents that they pursued during the phallic stage. So now they're pursuing age-appropriate peers. And conflicts of earlier stages may resurface. There may be some fixation. And that's the end of Freud's psychosexual theory of development. Now, there are many male development issues, a lot of them center around the Oedipal complex. So once again, males desire their mother, but they see their father as a rival. And they feel guilt and fear that the father will punish them by castrating them, cutting off their genitals. And this is derived from the Oedipal complex from Greek mythology. And the boys resolve this by identifying with their fathers rather than seeing them as a rival. So, daddy's mowing the lawn, I'm going to mow the lawn too. I want to be just like daddy. And that successful resolution, and the successful resolution of the Oedipal complex leads to the development of the superego. Now, at every stage of Freud's psychosexual theory, we can experience anxiety, and the anxiety is caused by the id impulses. And we're uncomfortable expressing these id impulses. So in order to deal with that anxiety caused by the id impulses, we can use defense mechanisms to get rid of them. or to repress them. And so here are some of the defense mechanisms. Regression. This is when we go back to an earlier, more infantile psychosexual stage. So under stress, a little boy reverts to the oral comforts of thumb sucking on the way to school. That's the oral stage. So thumb sucking, biting nails, this is regression to the oral stage. It generally happens under periods of anxiety or stress. Reaction formation. This is when you switch unacceptable impulses into their opposite. For example, you're really angry at someone, but that makes you feel anxious to know that you're really angry at someone. So instead of being really angry at them and generating anxiety in yourself, you switch it to the opposite. You become extremely friendly with them. Oh, I hate this person, but hey, how are you? Oh, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in such a long time. Wow, really great to see you. That's reaction formation. So this is also another example of reaction formation. You think back to when you were younger and you had a crush on somebody in school or some friend of yours, and you teased them all the time. You said you did nasty things to them because you really liked them, but you were just mean and nasty to them. That's reaction formation. Telling them how you feel would make you feel very anxious. So you engage in the complete opposite. You actually act mean to them and tease them because it's too uncomfortable telling them how you really feel. The third defense mechanism I'll talk about is projection. And this is when you disguise your own threatening impulses by attributing them to others. Really good example of this is when you're in a relationship and you're thinking about cheating on your significant other, but that's very anxiety provoking to you and you don't want to really admit to yourself that you would do this. So because you're the one that's thinking of cheating, what do? You have a conversation with your significant other and you say, I know you want to leave. I can see it in your eyes. I can see it in your body language. I know you're thinking of cheating on me. You don't want this relationship to work out. You blame them when that's how you really feel. You project your own uncomfortable emotions onto another person. Right? So it's hard to tell yourself that you want to leave. That's anxiety provoking, that you want to cheat on your partner. But if you blame them, it makes you feel better. So you project it onto them. The fourth defense mechanism is rationalization. This is when you offer self-justifying explanations in place for a real, more threatening, unconscious reason for one's actions. So you're doing something you know is wrong that makes you feel not good and anxious, and you need to get rid of that anxiety state. So you need to give a rationalization, an excuse for your behavior. For instance, a habitual drinker says, oh, I'm only drinking with friends just to be social, when in fact she's an alcoholic. But she says, I'm just being social with my friends. Because admitting to herself that she's an alcoholic is very anxiety provoking, and so she needs to make up an excuse for this behavior that she knows is wrong, and she rationalizes it by saying, I'm being social. The fifth defense mechanism that I have listed here is displacement. It's when you shift sexual or aggressive impulses towards a more acceptable or less threatening object or person. For instance, a little girl kicks the family dog after her mother sends her to her room. Well, she's mad at her mother, but she knows she can't kick the mother. If she kicks her mother, all hell will break loose. She'll be in deep trouble. So she's so mad, she takes it on the dog and she kicks the dog. Because the dog can't fight back. The dog's a more acceptable target. Or you're at work, you hate your boss. You're arguing with your boss constantly. You hate your boss. And so you displace your anger. When you get home, you take it out on your significant other. You start having an argument with them. You displace your anger towards your boss on your significant other. That's displacement. And finally, denial, refusal to believe refusing to believe or even perceive painful realities. So a partner denies evidence of his loved one's affair. So you walk in on your romantic partner having an affair. It's very blatant. You saw it with your own two eyes. There's not a need for evidence. You don't need a detective to figure this one out. But you're in denial. I'm not sure that your partner really did cheat on you. And you're trying to find reasons why they didn't cheat on you. Because it's too painful, it's too anxiety provoking to admit that your partner is having an affair. So that's denial. And those are some of them. There's more than this, but those are some of the more common defense mechanisms I wanted to give you. And a lot of them make sense. We can attribute them to our own life. It just kind of makes sense to us. They're hard to research because these are things you can't measure. And that's one of the big problems with psychoanalysis is you can't measure anything. So you don't know whether it's working, whether it's appropriate or not appropriate, because there's no way to tell. But these things kind of make sense, and we can fit them in our own lives, and it makes us feel comfortable saying, oh, that's projection, that's rationalization. It kind of makes sense to us. So let's play a game. Which defense mechanism am I? A politician gives an anti-gay speech and then turns out to have homosexual tendencies. So if you think about that, they're saying something opposite to what they truly believe. They're acting in a way opposite to what they truly feel. And so that turns out to be reaction formation. So someone with an anger problem accuses everyone else of being angry and threatening. So you feel an anger problem, but you accuse everyone else of being angry and threatening. You're sort of seeing your own problems in other people. So if you think of that, that's got to be projection. These sometimes are confused with each other. The common theme, as with all defense mechanisms, they seek us to prevent being unconscious of unacceptable feelings. So you're trying to remove the anxiety by pushing it out into the unconscious. The first one compensates for that. The second one distracts. So reaction formation is doing something opposite to how you really believe, and projection is attributing something you feel to another person because it's easier to accept that way, that you don't admit that you have the problem yourself. So let's talk a little bit about the neo-Freudians, what are called the psychodynamic theorists, and they differ a little bit in what they agree with Freud and traditional psychoanalysis. So some of the psychodynamic theorists include Adler, Horney, and Jung, and they accepted Freud's ideas about the importance of the unconscious in childhood for shaping personality and behavior. The id, the ego, and the superego structure of personality, and they accepted the role of defense mechanisms in reducing anxiety. However, they differ with regard to several important themes. Adler and Horney believe that anxiety and personality are a function of social and not sexual attention. So they de-emphasize the sexuality, and that's what most of the neo-Freudians do, is they've gotten away from the idea that the id operates with sexual and aggressive impulses, that everything in life is driven by sexual and aggressive impulses. And they've switched that now to social influences because there was a lot of conflict and a lot of pushback against Freud for his theory being overly sexual. And Jung also believed that we have something called the collective unconscious, and we contain images from our species' experiences, so images that are unique to all mankind. He called those images archetypes, not just personal repressed memories and wishes. So Jung had a little bit of a different take on the unconscious, that we all share some common theme that links us all together. So Jung highlighted universal themes in the unconscious as a source of creativity and insight. That's much different than Freud's emphasis on sexuality. And he found opportunities for personal growth by finding meaning in moments of coincidence. Alfred Adler focused on the fight against feelings of inferiority. Although he may have been projecting from his own experience, he may have felt inferior on his own and projected that into his theory. And Horney criticized Freud's portrayal of women as weak and subordinate to men. So this idea of penis envy, she completely rejected that. And she was right in that Freud's theory was very misogynistic and, saw men as superior to women, women as neurotic, women as weak, women wanting to be men. That's the idea behind penis envy. And she highlighted the need to feel secure in relationships. So these were very important, all three of these Neo-Freudians were very important departures from the overly sexual, overly aggressive Freudian traditional psychoanalysis. So how do we assess the unconscious? Well, Freud said free association. Freud said, what else he said? Dream theory, dream analysis. However, there's other ones, other techniques for assessing the unconscious, and these techniques are called projective measures or projective tests. Projective tests are structured, systematic exposure to standardized sets of ambiguous prompts. So basically, you're given ambiguous stimuli, and you have to project your unconscious onto that stimuli. So you have no idea what's in your unconscious, but based on this ambiguous or very unclear, where there's no right answer, stimuli, you are then identifying the stimuli and projecting your own unconscious onto that stimuli. So it's kind of like a sneaky way to get your unconscious to become conscious, is by, sort of identifying and telling a story about an object that has no real true form. It's completely ambiguous. And you'll see that here. One of the most famous projective tests is the Rorschach ink blot test. And so you get an ink blot like this here, and you have to ask yourself, what do you see here? So you look at it, and there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. It's just, what do you say? What do you see? And say the first thing that comes to your mind. Now, your answers are going to vary. If you were given all 10 cards, Rorschach cards, and you said they all represent death, destruction, misery, well, that's kind of that's kind of a theme that you could take as a therapist and say, look, you got a lot of negative energy. It could be frustration, anxiety, anger, a lot of bitterness in you that you may not even be aware of, right? So if you get consistent themes, if a consistent theme emerges across the many different cards you get, that can be used to help your diagnosis. You would never diagnose someone based off of one or two cards and what they said. You would need to have a theme emerge over the entire set of cards to use it in a diagnostic fashion. And once again, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. It's really up to your unconscious. The problem with the Rorschach is that it's become made public. It was actually posted to Wikipedia, and people started studying the cards. And once you start studying the cards, you game the system. The test doesn't, because you know what kind of response to give. You kind of train yourself to give a response that may not be accurate, right? It may be a socially desirable response. And so since these cards have become public, this test has gone down in terms of validity, how useful it is to help diagnose a problem. It also has very low validity and very low reliability. People can't come up with consensus on what your answers mean. So that's why I'm saying looking for themes is important more than trying to score these things, because scores are there's a scoring system out there. It's called the Exner scoring system, but it's complicated to learn, and there's questionable validity and reliability on that Exner scoring system. This is one of my favorite projective tests, and this is called the thematic apperception test, or TAT. And so you have to tell a story based on the picture you see. So look at the picture on the left and come up with a story, the first story that comes into your head. What's going on here? And then do the same thing for the right picture. And once again, there's no right or wrong answers, and you're looking for themes among different cards. So if you look at them and say, well, the first picture, she's devious in some way, and the second picture, the girl's cheating on him, well, maybe you have a negative view towards women. That emerges in all the cards that you see. The woman's always devious in the picture. Lack of trust could be the theme. But once again, you're looking for themes. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no formal scoring system. But it's a very interesting idea, exercise, and it's very helpful for therapists, especially when your client does not really want to, is not in the mood to really disclose a lot about his or her life. When you ask them, how are you today? How's your life? How's your last week going? I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. That might be their response. So you're not getting much in terms of dialogue. They may not want to discuss their problems. They might not be totally aware of their problems. And so this is a way of, this is an icebreaker, but it's also a way of getting the person to project their unconscious onto an ambiguous stimuli, and can be useful as an aid to diagnose and treat the client. And I talk more about all these things in the abnormal psychology course that I teach generally in the spring. So some recent evidence has updated Freud's ideas. Development appears to be a lifelong process, not set in stone by childhood. Freud emphasized childhood conflict. Development seems to be lifelong, not just childhood. Infant neural networks are not mature enough to create lifelong impact of childhood trauma. So there's a de-emphasis on the importance of childhood trauma that Freud believed in. Peers have more influence on personality and parents less than Freud assumed. So you see the whole idea of the Oedipus complex, where parents play a big role in the child's personality development. Maybe not so much. Dreams and slips of the tongue, Freudian slips, have many possible origins, and they're less likely to reveal deep unconscious conflicts and wishes. That Freud believed that this was a tunnel or a passage to the unconscious. We may ignore threatening information, but traumatic memories are usually intensely remembered, not repressed. Freud thought that if something was so traumatic that would harm you and bring about a lot of anxiety and cause a lot of damage to you, you would repress it and push it back into your unconscious. The evidence behind flashbulb memories suggests the opposite. Sexual abuse stories are more likely to be fact, less likely to be wish fulfillment than Freud immediately thought, because I think there's a de-emphasis on the sexuality component of his theory. And gender and sexual identity seems to be more of a function of genetics than the Oedipal complex and the relationship with parents. So the idea that sexual identity and gender identity is a result of failed Oedipal conflicts has been surpassed by the more logical explanation that there's genetic and biological prenatal environmental changes that can lead to gender and sexual identity. But at the time, homosexuality was rejected, right? It was pushed back upon, and this idea of genetics being the cause of homosexual behavior was really rejected up through the even into the 70s, where homosexuality was deemed a disorder, psychological disorder. And we now know how ludicrous that is, that it's purely a biological and genetic prenatal environment factor that leads to gender and sexual identity. There may be environmental influences, but they really trail the genetic and prenatal environment influences in terms of their relationship to sexual and gender identity. Freud's legacy, well, it benefited psychology. Freud was good for psychology, but he is not just psychology. Most people, when they think of psychology, they think of Freud. Obviously, that's way overblown. It did give us an importance of the impact of childhood on adulthood. We know that. It gave us some other things in terms of defense mechanisms that people see benefit in. Colleges have courses related to psychoanalysis outside of psychology departments. So psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory is an important social, geopolitical force in today's society as well. Freud also gave us scientific concepts we use often, such as projection, regression, rationalization, dream interpretation, Freudian slips, sibling rivalries. And this was over 100 years ago when psychology was in its infancy, and he had a huge impact on psychology. So Freud, and psychoanalysis works for a lot of people. and still does work to this day. Even if you're not in favor of psychoanalysis, people do get better from psychoanalysis. So it does work. It doesn't work for everybody, but no therapy works for every single individual. So Freud did contribute a lot to psychology. However, the big problem with Freud's theory was it's untestable. There's no way to measure all of these concepts he comes up with, and there's no way to test the unconscious. You know, projective tests are, we're assuming that that's your unconscious coming through. There's no way to be certain of that. I can't measure the unconscious by just giving you the tat. That may help me make a diagnosis, but I can't say this is your unconscious, what you tell me in this picture. There's no way of knowing that. So it's a very hard theory to test, and that is the pretty much the biggest downfall and the biggest critique in Freud's theory.